Hello, John.
Hello, Oliver. Morning.
Today we're going to talk about the role of women in society and how it's changed, particularly over the last 50 years. We have a thing now called gender equality. Gender equality has created the breakdown of the traditional family, and you say it's created the exploitation of women also in society.
Well, we can just go back to in the 50s, 60s, the traditional role of women was in the family home as mothers, including my own mother and mothers in general in families in Ireland. Their role was in the home, looking after the home and doing a very good job and looking after children. When children were in school, and oftentimes if they lived in towns or places like that, they were able to come home for their lunch, for something to eat, and so the mother was able to have something ready for them, especially in the winter, maybe something warm, maybe a bit of soup and something light, because oftentimes they didn't have that much time when they come home from school. They might have 3/4 of an hour or something like that, so the mothers did that.
Okay. And now in society we have quite a few different type of parents. You got the single mothers, there's quite a lot of single mothers in Irish society. You've got the cohabiting couples, you've got the traditional marriage, you've got same-sex couples, which is a controversial issue, and you've got a small number of single fathers. So the actual family is very fragmented.
It is, compared to what it was. You know, I just go forward from to try and see what the background, which led to that situation that you just described. A lot of women worked in factories and various other outlets and outfits in the 50s and 60s. For example, Jacob's factory, I remember in Bishop Street in Dublin, had about 500 young women. When they got married, they left that occupation and their husbands provided the money for the family and look after the home and purchase the home as the case might be. Now, ladies that joined the civil service, because the civil service in a new state as we were, and after the war, if you like, that Second World War, which creates a lot of problems in Europe and indeed in this country in some respects, it led to instability. But in any event, ladies that worked in the civil service, when they got engaged and were getting married, they left the civil service. That was the rule, and they got a dowry. They got a lump sum, which in many cases was a great help in buying a family home.
Who gave them the dowry?
The civil service. They were ahead of their time in that respect. They gave them a dowry because the government at that time and society regarded a woman's role as very important, and very important for the home and for the orderly development of society, which is what it was at the time.
I just want to interrupt you on a dowry, just for people who don't know what a dowry is.
Well, a dowry
it's an old word.
Would have been a lump sum from the civil service, usually up to 1,000 or maybe more at the time, which was substantial.
Wow.
And was plenty and was enough to often put a deposit on a home. And if herself and her husband to be were prudent, as they were, and that was encouraged those times, if they were prudent, well then they had some money saved, so they were able to buy a home, and the husband's salary was sufficient for them to be able to live and provide food and pay for the various other expenses that would be attached to running a family. And the mother's role then was in the home, and that's the way most women were in the home. When they were married and raising a family. So that went on for many years until such time as society developed, whereby they had this business of the woman not needing to retire from the civil service when she got married. She could go back and work again, and if she had a family, she could have some time off and go back again. And so that was in some ways the start of the family being fragmented. In other words, the married couple were not in the home only in the evening. And so if there was a family, relatives maybe come to the aid, because there weren't many creches where they could bring children the way they do now. So family members helped out, aunts, uncles and various other relatives helped to look after the children while the mother was at work. So that was the first onset of the dislocation and the interruption of the family home as it was.
Okay, so women nowadays, they have to not only do they have to hold down a full-time job, but now they have to do the chores as well. They're at home, and when they're at home, they have to work as well.
That's right. And funny enough, I think it's very evident with the breakdown of marriage that this can cause problems in marriages, because the woman is working outside the home. There's children involved perhaps, and so they have to be looked after. Some method has to be developed for those where they're looked after in a creche or somewhere else, and that costs money. So when the family come home, it's expected now that the man's role is not that, it's that of a provider, but also he's expected to pull his weight in the home, and so his role as the main provider has been weakened. And I think it's a cause of conflict in marriages now, because one feels that the other is not pulling their weight, and so on and so forth. So this can cause problems. That's in the marriages now, as is when people do get married. They need to have a very strong spiritual and perhaps religious Christian background, so as to be able to work through these problems. But if they're sort of perhaps have fallen away from the practice of these virtues and that kind of thing, well then their marriages can be in trouble, and a lot of marriages are in trouble, as witnessed the divorce and the various breakdown of marriages, and the fact of the various other problems. People don't actually get married and sometimes have children, and because they don't make the commitment.
Do you think feminism has caused more problems than it has solved?
Well, that's been a factor, but what has aided that factor particularly is the media. The media has been, in my view, in this country, and perhaps in other countries, but particularly in this country, has been kind of hostile towards the family. And the political parties also have been a bit hostile. They pay lip service, but the policies that they adopt militate against the family. For example, in this country now, practically 50% of births are to women that are not married and are classified as single mothers. That was a problem years ago and caused various social problems.
Years ago it was a stigma, now it's acceptable.
Well, it unfortunately was a stigma, which of course it shouldn't have been, but it wasn't something that was widely practiced. But some women did have children outside wedlock, and at the time some were helped, very much so, but some weren't, and so therefore you had the mother and child homes and all the rest of it, where at least nuns and people like that came to their aid when society didn't come to their aid. So that was a period that the media now highlights as being in some ways very bad, whereas at the time it was a help to these women that had children outside wedlock and who experienced difficulties from their families. So the families were some ways to blame more than anything else, and society perhaps. But I think there'd be casting stones at the nuns and people that provided some help for these families that were in that situation don't deserve the criticism that they got, because it did provide some shelter for women who was in that position at that time. So we've moved on from that, and now there's nothing like that provided for children, except if they're handicapped. And a lot of the religious and institutions are looking after handicapped children now whose families can't rear them or look after them because they're the various handicaps. So there's a lot of that still going on. There's a lot of children in foster homes and in care because families are so unable to look after them for one reason or another. Perhaps they're cohabitating, they're not married. So there's a lot of problems that we don't hear about.
Is a reversal to the traditional family model the answer?
Well, the answer is to respect the family and produce policies that enable the families to be able to be married, and that it's not mandatory on the wife to have to work outside the home in order to provide sufficient income so as they can purchase their home and look after their children. Society shouldn't be run in such a way by the political establishment to enable families to live harmoniously together and promote the married state rather than anything else, and don't produce policies that militate against the family, the married couple that wish to be married in a Christian tradition and stay married.
Why do you think there's so many single mothers in Ireland?
Well, it follows the trend in Europe, well, not so much in Europe, in Britain and perhaps America. There's other countries in Europe, I could mention Spain, Italy, France to a certain extent, that there's not as prevalent as it is here, because there isn't the same handouts, there isn't the same financial assistance for unmarried mothers as there is in this country. In other countries, families are expected to look after children on which there are women that have children that are not married. If their family is expected to look after it, society doesn't provide all the aids that they do in this country. So if you like, the establishment, the political parties here, particularly I think the Labour Party, has been instrumental in some ways unsettling and dismantling the traditional family to its shame, and to the fact that society now is so fragmented.
John Malone will cover this subject probably in more detail in the future video. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver.